Hey everyone, today we're going to learn how to 3D model in Blender. I'm going to cover 5 key workflows that I use every day as a professional 3D artist. I know when you're first starting out in Blender, the UI and the amount of tools can be very intimidating. So in this video, I'm going to focus on giving you the skills and tools that you need to get up and running on how to 3D model. So with that, let's jump right into it. Alright, so here we are in Blender and you can see that we have our Geiger counter 3D model that we'll be creating in this tutorial series. And this is a fantastic model to really get you up to speed on all the different tools within Blender for 3D modeling. Now, if you are following along, I'm just going to start from a completely blank and scratch scene of Blender. So I'm just going to hit File, New, and hit General. And then you can see that we have other menus up here. We are not going to go through every single menu, and it won't be an exhaustive list, but it's going to give you the ability to get comfortable with the UI as you go. Really, one of the best things that you can do is just continue to practice and use Blender to become more comfortable with it. So if I hit Edit, I'm going to head down to Preferences, and we're going to look at the add-ons that we're using. This is as bare bones default Blender as you can get. The only thing that I'm using are default add-ons. One being Loop Tools, which is a fantastic tool, and I'll show you how to use those. And the other really is just for me, being the screencast keys. And that's something that you can find online, so I'll drop a link in the description for that if you're interested in using that. So I will now close that, and you can see that we have our default Blender cube and camera and light. Now at the top is pretty nice because you have your workspaces. We have like our modeling, sculpting, UV editing, where we are going to primarily be working within the modeling workspace. I like it because it kind of gets rid of the time slider. We're not going to be using that at all, and gives you more real estate to work. So if I actually head back to layout, I want to cover a couple of things before we get into edit mode. Now, you can see me orbiting around the cube here. Now to do that, you can simply hit middle mouse button and orbit around. And what's nice is if you actually look down here at the status bar, it gives you kind of contextual messages and information on what you can do within Blender. So you can see that it says, hey, you can use pan or rotate and different mouse buttons to do what you want to do. So middle mouse button will orbit. The next one is going to be shift middle mouse button, which will pan the entire screen. And then if you want to zoom in, you can use the scroll wheel, but you can see it's kind of like an incremental zoom, or you can use Control Shift middle mouse button, and that'll allow you to more precisely zoom in. So this is great and allow you to be pretty comfortable. But let's say you accidentally zoom too far out or too far in, you can just hit the period button on the number pad, and that'll zoom you in on whatever object that you have selected. I can select my camera and it'll jump and frame that camera object. Okay, so those are the tools that allow us to navigate within our 3D viewport. You'll also see that we have our outliner here at the top, which will contain all of our objects within our 3D scene. And we also have the properties. I really wouldn't worry about all of these different properties. And really the key thing here is just knowing that if you select a mesh object, that you'll get specific settings or properties for that. If I select the camera, you'll see that I can also get camera settings down here, right? So you see camera settings and then mesh settings, so on and so forth. So that's just a good thing to know. Now, the next thing is we have our transformation or translation tools, which are going to be how to move, scale, and rotate our objects. Now, in order to do that in Blender, it's really nice because many of the hotkeys are just the initials of whatever tool you're trying to do. So in Blender, to move an object, it's called grab. So you want to use G for grab. Now, if I hit G, you can see that I can move the object now in 3D space, which is nice. So if I hit G and then X, you'll see that the red line, there's kind of this red line that shows up that lets you know that you're moving the object on the x-axis. I can also, of course, pick like Y, and then now we're moving on the y-axis. And then I can hit Z, and then I'm moving up and down in the vertical Z-axis. Understand that the red X green Y, and then our Z axis here is blue, right? So all of that you can just remember based off these color coordinate systems right here based off of this kind of axis gizmo, all right? So that is kind of how you move and use the coordinate system to be precise. The next thing you can do is rotate your object. So you can see I can rotate. So if I zoom in here or hit Control Z to bring it back, you can see I can rotate. But if I want to rotate on a specific axis, I can. So I'm just moving it across my viewport and it's rotating it around the x-axis. So if I actually kind of move it, you'll see that the XYZ is based off what's called the left-handed coordinate system. So that means here we have X, Y, and Z. And then if I wanted to rotate, again, so if I hit rotate and then X, you'll see that it's rotating about the X-axis like this. So it's not like you're looking down. Instead, it's rotating about the axis. So that's just a nice thing to know as you're going along. So I'll undo that. And then the other one is S for scale. And to change the size of the object here, that'll allow you to change the size and scale of the object. Now you can, of course, hit S and then X, and it'll kind of scale it in one axis, which is, you know, a really good tool to have. The other one that I like to use is to create a new object, which is Shift A, and then I will create a cylinder. And then within the cylinder, now I'm going to actually just move our cube here. So I'm going to actually delete the cube and delete the cylinder, and I will create the cylinder mainly because I want you to see that there are these properties down here. And if I zoom in, you can see the segments and the vertices that are being created. So you can see I can increase and decrease that. And if you want to see the wireframe a little bit more clearly, you can head over here to Viewport Overlays, and then you can enable wireframe. So you can see the wireframe now without clicking on the object. The other thing that's really helpful is if you click off the object, if you hit F9, you get these properties back. But this only works as like a, you have one chance to use the last feature you just used. So I can change the, again, if I change the segments here and click off of it and then like hit G and then Y just to move it in the Y-axis. Now if I hit F9, you can see that I only have the move tool. So it's really good, and that is really helpful when you're going in and creating objects. But the other one that I want to show you is when you're scaling, you can hit Shift Z to non-uniformly scale your objects. So you can see I'm scaling in the X and the Y, but not the Z. So it's kind of getting fatter there. Now, I highly recommend you use the hotkeys when learning Blender. And if you don't, you have the tools up here at the left panel, right? So you can see that I have Move tool, and I can kind of move interactively within the 3D viewport. And this is actually very similar to Maya. This is actually what I was more comfortable with previously, but I got used to the hotkeys really quick within Blender. And then I can have the rotate tool, and it allows you to rotate. Now, if you want to rotate snap, you can simply hold Control, and you can see you have some snapping here. You can, of course, jump over to another tab, which is right here, which is kind of your another tab of information, and you have your item tool, view, and whatever add-ons are going to be added here. So you have all of that here as well. So if you wanted to make sure to, you know, type in the exact rotation, or if I want to rotate it 75, you can do that right here. So that covers kind of the transformation, translation tools within Blender. And then now that we can orbit around, manipulate the viewport, move our objects, I want to start looking at the tools that we're going to be using to model the main form of the Geiger counter. Then I'm going to head over to the modeling workspace. So in the modeling workspace, I'm going to also delete my camera and light since I won't need those, and I will hit Shift A to create a new mesh. Now, since I will be creating this Geiger counter, really, I'm not creating this from memory or anything. I am using a pretty detailed reference board and mood board. I cannot state enough how important reference is. In any one of my videos, you always see whatever it is that I'm modeling, regardless of the simplicity, you always want to have reference. So spend the time find the reference, not only from a modeling standpoint, but also understanding the material and the texturing as well. You know, if you want to tell a bit more of a story here. So we have what we need for reference. I'm going to move this back over here on my other monitor. And what you can do is when you first create the cube, I will create it at 1 meter. And the object initially, by default, meters are very big. 1 meter is about 3 feet, right? Going from imperial to metric. Well, I have the dimensions here, so I'm going to type in these dimensions right inside of Blender. And what you can do is if I click off and then open up our tab here, by the way, you can do that with N on your keyboard, and you can kind of see the hotkey popping up and out. And then you can also see that you have the hotkeys here for your transform tools, which are T, right? So with this, we have our transform tools. I can type in the dimensions in XYZ. So we can see that it's 16.5 centimeters. What's really nice in Blender is just type in cm for centimeters, and it will automatically do the conversion for you. But it's only a couple of decimal places, so it's not that big. But if I actually did want to put 24 inches, so IN, you can see that it'll convert it over to meters really nicely. So I will, again, type in 8.9 centimeters, and then I will do 21.6 centimeters, and there we go. Then, because it's a lot smaller now, I want to hit the period on the number pad, and then there we go. Now I want to rotate the object. So I can simply hit R for rotate, and then Y since I want to rotate about the Y axis. And you can see I can rotate. And then if I hold Control, you can see I can snap this 90 degrees. And there we go. So I am good to go, and I like the position of this. And you'll notice that it is a little bit taller because it also, you know, it looks like it includes the handles, or at least this component here. So what I will do is just scale this down in the Z. So now you can see how I'm applying these transform workflows very quickly to get the right size, or approximately close size of the object. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to duplicate this with Shift D and move this. So you can see now I've created a duplicate of this, and I'm going to press Y. You can see I can just move this in the Y axis. I'm going to hide this object because I want to make sure that I explain something that's really important in Blender. Is that when you move, rotate, especially scale, when you scale objects in Blender and then you want to get into modeling or UV mapping or really anything within Blender, you want to make sure to apply the scale. In order to apply the scale, you hit Control A, and then there we go. That applies the scale, and now you can see the scale is now 1 by 1 by 1, which is exactly what we want. Okay, and once we apply the scale here, you can click off and that'll accept the scale. Now, we've positioned the object, we've created, positioned, scaled, everything's good to go. Now we can actually do the modeling. And in order to do the modeling, we have to do what's called, or go into what's called edit mode. And if I hit tab, you'll see that now the object kind of changes colors. It's a little bit orange, and you can see the edges and vertices in the face is selected. How do I know it's selected? Because everything's orange. If I left click off, you'll see that nothing now is selected. But if I press 1, you can see that I am in vertex mode. And how do you know? Well, there's this little icon up here that lets you know that you're in vertex mode. If I wanted to jump over to edge mode, you have this icon, and then face mode is this face icon here. Now again, you do that by 1, 2, and 3. So you can see 2, now I can start to select the edges, and then 3, I can select the faces. So great. So edit mode gives us exactly what we need to actually start creating, and we want to add some of this curvature here within the object, within our object. So I will now grab these edges. So if I hit 2, to go into edge mode, I want to round these corners out by using a tool called Bevel. Now in order to do that, I can select all of these edges, and there's a couple different ways to do that. I can hit Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode and just marquee select like this. If I hit Alt-Z, I'll go back. But because if you don't have X-ray mode or Shift-Z, wireframe mode, then you can't select behind it. So understand that Blender uses by default back face culling, and I looked this up. I couldn't really find an easy way to disable that, so you always have to just go into X-ray or wireframe mode. So I'll just use the wireframe or X-ray mode to select all these edges, and then toggle it again. So I'll use Alt Z. Then I can hit Control B. So this is going to be our first modeling tool, which is going to be the Bevel tool. So I hit Control B, and there we go. I am now added or beveled this. Now if you just drag and left click, you'll kind of accept it, and then you'll have the properties here that you can change, and I can increase segments like so. Or if I undo that, you can hit Control B, drag these, and you can see if I use my middle mouse scroll wheel and scroll, I can add segments. And I always recommend using about an even number of segments here. So I will use 4 face segments, and this will give me about what I need. And looking at the reference, I can see I can bring the curvature about like so. You can always type in very precise values if you have the exact measurements, but this is good. So I'll left click to accept that. And there's a bunch of other settings within the tool, but I'm not worried about that. This gives me a nice clean bevel. So earlier you saw me selecting edges through X-ray. Well, you can select what's called edge loops here. So if I select this edge here and then alt click the neighboring edge or the edge right next to it, that allows you to select the whole loop of edges, which is great. So again, you can kind of see this here. If I select this edge and then the neighboring edge, actually you have to understand the difference between loop and rings. So if I alt click, you can see I've selected a loop, but if I want to select these, well, I have to use alt control to select the loops. You can of course also select the faces and then alt click the neighboring face, and that selects the face loop as well. So I will go back, I'll press 2 on my keyboard to go back to edge mode. I'll select and then alt select the neighboring edge, and I'll hit Control B, and there we go. We can start to bevel this until we get something, you know, approximately about the size that we want. Maybe I say I want this to be exact, I'll use 0.005. Great. And I can left click off and accept the bevel action. Okay, so that was the bevel tool. The next tool that I want to use is going to be the loop cut tool, or inserting edge loop. You hit Control R to enter loop cut mode. Pick the ring of edges you want to add the loop cut, and then you can click and then slide. And a nice tool or shortcut is you can right click and it'll throw it right there in the center. If I undo that, you can also, if I hit Control R to enter the tool again, you can scroll, mouse scroll wheel, to increase or decrease the amount of segments. So I can add a ton of different edges, and then once I add, like if I want to add 3, then I can move and slide these wherever I want. So this is nice. So I'm going to undo that. I'll hit Control R again, and I'm just going to add a nice loop cut here towards the top because I want to create this nice lip that runs around the top of the Geiger counter. So now that I've used the loop cut tool, inserted an edge loop, now I want to use the next tool, which is going to be Extrude. So with Extrude, I'm going to jump into face mode with 3. Then I'm going to select a series of faces. Now by default, if I just select the face and hit E for Extrude, you can see that it's just going to create new geometry and extrude up. And this works great for most of the time. And if I hit E again, you can see that it'll just kind of extrude it out, you know, straight off of that normal of the face. But if I have a multiple selection like this, and I alt click the neighboring face with left click, and then I hit E for extrude, you get this. And this is not good, right? This is not what we want. We want to extrude out on what's called the normal of the faces. So I'll Control Z to undo that. And instead of hitting E, I'll hit Alt E for extrude faces along normals. Perfect, that's what we want. So I will extrude faces along normal. Great, and you can be more precise. Maybe you want to do 0.0025. It's a pretty thin piece, so I think this will give us what we want, and this works really well. Now, I did bring up that I wanted to show you what happens actually when you don't apply scale. So if I quickly jump over to that scale that we have hidden, and you'll see now, if I jump into tab edit mode, and then if I alt click and select these edges here, I'm going to select these edges, and if I hit Control B you'll kind of see what happens, right? Look at the difference between these two bevels, right? And if I head over to the viewport layouts and enable wireframe unshaded, you can see the difference between these two bevels. This is a perfect bevel. This is exactly what we want. But here on the left, with no applied scale transformations, we get this, and it just doesn't look right. So you're going to probably hit your head on the desk. You're like, why isn't this working? That's why. Always make a note, write it down, whatever you have to do, always apply your scale. All right. So now we can just get rid of that guy. We don't need him no more. In edit mode, if I hit Control R, you'll see that the edge that we're cutting in just stops right here, right? And the reason why is because all of these faces are what's known as quads, or four-sided faces. But this face, this guy's just a giant, what's called n-gon, n being whatever number it's going to be. If you want to be, or have a little bit more information, you can actually head over here to the viewport layouts again and enable statistics. I personally always work with this, and this will let you know that this object currently is 356 triangles, 162 faces, which faces are just, you know, double or half or double, vice versa, triangles, and it lets you know all of that information. And if I go back into edit mode and select this face again, you can see that it says this is one face, but it has, you know, 20 edges, right? So this is a 20-sided n-gon. So we want to clean this up, because what I ultimately want to do is add in this cut here, this cut for this panel. So in order to do that, again, we'll grab our knife tool, and to get our knife tool, you hit K for knife. So I'm in knife mode, and I can click, left click, boom. What you need to do next is right click to accept the cut. Now we're still in, you can see by the icon, we're still in knife mode. So I can left click to cut again, right click to accept the cut, and then we want to cut across from this point here. Do that again, so I'll just redo that cut. Great. And then I can right click, and then just using my viewport navigation, rotating around, right click to accept and hit enter, and there you go. So now if I hit Control R, you can see that it will actually cut across nicely on the whole object. It actually just connected these two vertices, which is nice. It doesn't always do that, but we have to at least help it a little bit. So great. So we have this, and what I want to do next is, again, I'll Control R to now loop cut another edge here. So I would say I'll probably add it right around here, and then from here I would say I can select this face. So if I go into face mode with 3, and then now I want to use the next tool, right? And this is the fourth tool. The last one I'll show you is more about just a whole workflow. All right, so this one we're going to do what's called Inset. And Inset with an I is going to allow us to create a new face. So it's like Extrude, but we're not adding volume. So I'll hit I, and there you go. You can create a new face this way. Now, a couple of things, caveats to notice about Inset is if I go to the center of the face and press I have less precision. You see, because this is going to happen. This happened to me when I first learned Blender. I was like, what the heck? Inset's not working. Instead, you want to be on the outside of the face and then kind of come in like this. So that gives you more precision. So depending on where you are around the face, that will give you what you want. So we just did an inset on that, which is exactly what we need. And then from here, I can do an extrude. So I want to extrude down after we've done this inset. So I'll hit E now for extrude, and we're going straight down, which is nice. And I would say maybe I want this to be 0.005. And then what I'll do is to add a little bit of thickness here and a little bit of a gap. I'm going to give it a pretty small tolerance. I'll inset again. So I'll hit I for inset, make this really, really small, maybe like 0.001. Great. So we have this now. Now there's a couple different things you can do. You can duplicate faces. You can separate the face. So if I want to duplicate the face, I can simply hit, with the face selected, Shift D. Okay, so Shift D will kind of move and duplicate the face and keep an existing face there. All right, So another thing that you can do is we can separate the face. And to separate the face, you can use Y on your keyboard. And if I hit Y and then G, there we go. We've extracted the face. Now there's a way to completely extract the face, but in this case, we want to keep this part of the same object. If you did want to separate this into its own entirely separate object, just hit P. And it's going to say separate by selection, material, so on and so forth. And you can see it created a new cube object or a new 3D object. Now we don't want that. Again, we just simply want to kind of separate it within the cube here. All right, so if I double check, great. So we have this as a separate object, and I can hit E now to extrude, and there we go. So we've extruded this, but I kind of went a little bit too far, and I want to make sure that's perfectly level with what we have. So now we're going to take a look at the last workflow, which is, being able to move and manipulate your components. What do I mean by that? So if I in here and I have this face selected, one thing that we can do is snap to other objects. So what I want to do is select this face here and head over to the top where you have snapping, and I'm going to turn on Vertex. Now with Vertex enabled, it'll snap to any of the vertex points within the model. Make sure that you enable this magnet. If you don't enable the magnet, snap mode is not actually on. So now if I hit G, you'll see that it'll start snapping to different points on the object, which is great. And with G for grab and then Z, I want to move it down, we can just snap, boom, and make that completely level with this object here, which is exactly what we want. Great, so we've went ahead and did that. And then the next thing that we want to do is to be able to do another bevel here on the tool, on the corners here, both of these corners at the same time, so they're exactly the same. There we go. So we could have done this in any order, by the way. I could have beveled first, inset and extruded, and then that'll give me what I want. But it's a pretty small corner here. So if I can go 0.0015, maybe half that. There we go, that looks about right. Okay, so from here, like I said, I want to look at manipulating these objects. So for example, if I want to click off, hit Control R, we're going to add a loop cut again, and I want to loop cut on this object. One thing that helps me immensely to be able to manipulate and have precision with modifying these models is to use edge slide. Now edge slide, there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can use edge slide by using G. So double tap GG and you can see that it'll nicely slide, okay? And it doesn't really, there's really no benefit other than using GZ here because it's just moving it straight up and down. But for example, if I want to move on the normal of the object, I can use Alt S. And so Alt S is a great way to nicely add volume. Now I'm not going to need to do this, but what I want to explain is that if you moved edges here or vertices along the normals, then I can, let's say, for example, grab these two edges and hit GG for slide, and then I can slide these edges. Now you can see it's snapping because I forgot to turn off snap, so I'll just turn off snap there and then hit GG again, and you can see I can freely slide here, and you can slide edges, you can slide vertices, and I'm using these functions all the time. This is not, and I use these more for organic shapes, especially for vehicle modeling and surface paneling and stuff like that. So if I undo quite a few times, we're kind of back to normal here. Great. So using edge slide and move on normal is incredibly crucial. So I'll undo that. So I will remove this edge. And actually that's one of the other things is if you want to remove an edge, simply hit delete. And we want to dissolve edges. So dissolving edges will remove the edges and vertices. And if we wanted to, for example, now, if I go here for this face, I can hit delete, and then I can delete faces. And you can see I have an open hole. So this may be what you want. And let's say you're working here and you select this edge loop, which is nice, and then I can extrude this down if I wanted to, And if I wanted to fill this hole, well, you simply hit F. So now these are kind of like miscellaneous tools that I regularly use all the time. So these are ways to just, manipulate the mesh even further. So I won't go too much further. I want to hit on the last thing, which is using loop cut tools. For these loop cut tools, if I hit Control R, and then I want to add 3 edges, and then I will click and right click to add in edges here. And then if I hit Control R again, I want to add in an edge right about the middle here, and I'll right click, boom. And then we've added the faces here. So I'm actually going to use GG. So I will edge slide this down a little bit further. I will Alt select this edge. Now it's no longer nicely in the center. But if I look at our reference, it's a little bit offset. It's a little bit to the left. So, we may be able to work with this. So GG to edge slide again, and I'll hit Control R, cut. So we're getting right about to the end now. So if I hit 3, I want to now do an extrusion here. But you can see that it's a square shape. And if I want to make this circular, that's where loop cut comes in. So what I'm going to do is inset. So hit I to inset, and we bring this in. And then from here, I'll use K to add in more edges. Because the quick spoiler, if I right click, go to loop tools and do circle, you see I have the circle now, but it doesn't give me a lot of edges. So instead, I'll hit K for knife tool, and I can cut across and right click. So left click, left click, left click. There you go. So we're just left clicking on these points and then right clicking to accept the cut. Great. And so we have that. So I just simply added quite a bit more, and I hit enter. So I'll reselect these faces, and then I will right click, go to loop tools and do a circle. Boom, we get this nice circle here. And then from here, I will hit S for scale, kind of scale this down. You can see that it's a little bit off, no big deal. I can just rotate that, and I can even, it's a little bit off. I can hit G and then X and just move that in position where it's a little bit even. This is fine. This is good for what I'm trying to do. And I can hit I for inset, and boom, we're just creating new faces here. Now, I could have done an extrude with a scale, but instead I did an inset, and now I'll just hit G, Y, and kind of move that. So I'm picking up the pace a little bit just so you can see me kind of closer in real time, using all of these different tools to be able to create all of this new detail and geometry. One of the last things here, hopefully, is if I hit I for inset, and we kind of insetted that. But if I want to delete these or collapse these, you use the delete key and then select collapse edge and faces, and boom, you get this nice loop here. And so the final thing, the final polish, is I will select these edges, and if I press Alt click, I can bevel these here. Okay, so I can Alt click, and then continue to bevel these here. Now, if I wanted to do these with different tolerances, I could, but this should be fine. If I hit Control B for bevel, I can bevel all of these objects, and at the same time, I'm going to scroll down. So we just have this one there, something like this. That should be fine. Let's keep moving. And then for this one, I'm going to inset this face, and we're going to give this a nice bevel. I insetted so I can hold Shift Alt to select the whole loop. If you try to select a loop without a face loop, you're going to run into issues. So Control B, and then I can pull that out and get a little bit more precise there. Now, if for whatever reason you we mess something up and it's like, oh shoot, I hit Alt S and I accidentally moved something on the normal and I was down here and I forgot, and then it's like I want to reapply the symmetry, right? Well, in order to reapply symmetry, you can hit 3 to go into face mode, hit A to select all, so A to select all, then go to Mesh, Symmetrize, boom. Now we need to tell it that we want to copy it from negative or positive Y. So if the line's here, this is positive Y, over to the other side, which is negative y. So we want to do positive y to negative I and y. And there you go. You just did a quick symmetry. So I'm kind of speed running these last few tools here, but these are definitely the tools and workflows that I use, I mean, all the time, you guys, all the time, to create whatever 3D model I'm working on. So this that covers essentially everything that I wanted to hit here. So I think this puts us in a good spot. And in the next couple of videos, we'll go deeper into modeling and how to use primitives to create complex shapes and do all sorts of things. So if you found this helpful, definitely leave a comment if I missed anything, or if there's some hotkeys that could have made my job a little bit easier, made our jobs a little bit easier, throw it down below. But I will be making way more Blender tutorials, and I plan to release some Unreal Engine stuff as well. So with that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.